Today, we kick off with some powerful context from ALM Intelligence. They leverage proprietary data to deliver analysis, tools, and knowledge to help their clients create value. I'm pleased to introduce two of their thought leaders. Nick Brew is Director of ALM Intelligence and an expert on the legal industry. He works with executive leadership of law firms of all sizes across both developed and developing markets. His analysis is widely published. Erin Heichman is ALM Intelligence lead for technology research. As a senior analyst, she covers technology and technology trends in the legal industry. Each year, ALM Intelligence shares insights they have observed through their unique lens. Most of us have opinions. ALM contributes more than an opinion. They deliver data-driven observations we can all use to achieve more successful futures. We look forward to learning about the state of our industry from them today. Please join me in welcoming Nick and Erin to the Legalweek stage.
Thanks, Cliff, and welcome to Legalweek. This is the third year that ALM Intelligence has opened up the week. Every year we talk about data, we talk about trends, we discuss law firms and law departments, legal technology, and alternative service providers. We want to do some of that today, of course, but what we really want to talk to you guys is about opportunities and risks. I think we all know the legal market is changing. I think we all feel that. We know that it's changing rapidly. The challenge for everyone in this room is to figure out where the risks of that change are and where the opportunities, and to get ahead of it, to figure out where the market is going.
And Nick and I do just that. We pore over data and we speak to leaders in the legal industry. And one of the things that we hear are some competing narratives going on. And I understand why this is happening. If you look at the data, what you see are some conflicting messages. If you take a look at the law department side, you can see that the law department has really been on a journey since the downturn for the last 10 years. This started as a way to cut and control costs. But since then, it's turned into a new way of operating. The law department is insourcing more, they're using more ASPs, and yes, they're using law firms less.
Now, if we look at the law firm side of the equation, we see a different story. If we look at the last fiscal year, what we see is law firms grew their revenue by just over 5%. To put that into context, that means the law firm market grew faster than the accounting industry. They grew over twice the pace of the US economy. 80% of firms reported increases in profitability. A quarter of firms increased profitability by 10% or more. Let's be clear here, this is the kind of performance that most Fortune 500 companies would kill for. And the most important data point we have is about the year that just ended. The fiscal year that law firms are reporting to ALM Intelligence right now, if we look at the data that's coming in, what we expect is law firms are going to post their best year in over a decade this year. Now, how do we square these two stories, right? How do we square the law firm's success on the one hand and what Erin talked about on the other hand? We see law firms reporting higher profit per equity partner, profit per lawyer, revenue per lawyer, and almost every important metric we track. On the law department side, we see they're reporting tighter budgets. They're telling us they're handing more power to their ops teams to get greater control over their spend. They're insourcing more. They're using technology more. And yes, as Erin said, they're starting to use new methods of legal spend management that don't use law firms. How do we square these two competing narratives of where the industry is going? That's the challenge that we all face. And what Erin and I would argue is if you want to put the pieces together, if you want to start to create a cohesive narrative on where the legal industry is going, you have to start somewhere simple, and you have to start on the client side and understand what's going on there. So let's start there.
So one of the things I hear often is that the law department will act in the role of the general contractor. I like this idea. It seems simple at first, but here's the problem. What exactly does that mean? What are the core competencies of an in-house general contractor? How do the service providers fit into this picture? And what exactly will the law department do? These are really great questions to understand. One place we can start to look to for answers is the data. When we look at that data, you can see that the insourcing trend has been a huge disruptor in the legal industry. This graph shows headcount at large law firms and at in-house teams. And what you see is that those two lines largely moved together until the downturn. And then in about 2010 or so, something happened. The law firm headcount flatlined and in-house team headcount accelerated. Why is this? What was the source of this change? To provide answers, we sat down with Nancy Jessen, who is a leader at United Lex and an expert on the law department. We asked her about this insourcing trend and what it means for the future of the law department. This is what she had to say.
When law departments were really forced to deal with their cost infrastructure, started back in 08, 9, 10 with the recession, and the natural instinct was to look at outside counsel. It was the largest percentage of spend, and frankly, it was a little less personal than thinking about how their internal resources were staffed and the cost of those. So what happened is that pendulum of so much work being to outside counsel, frankly, started to swing, and law departments were thinking about insourcing legal work. It was a natural conclusion that inside it's maybe about a ratio of 1 to 3 cost versus outside. However, there wasn't really thinking about what are some of the ripple effects or some of the unintended consequences of doing that insourcing. Law departments have grown. Many departments now can be 600, 700, 800 plus people, and that number of headcount is relevant to a company's metrics. It now makes a difference that the law department has a material impact on the operating costs, the fixed costs of a company.
You know, Nancy is absolutely right. If you look at the data, what you see is that the cost of hiring a lawyer at a law firm is roughly 3 times the cost of hiring an in-house resource. Which is also absolutely right that law departments responded to this fact, and what you see on this graph, which is the increasing cost of hiring a lawyer by insourcing, and that made complete sense. What I actually found most interesting about Nancy's comment in that clip is what she said about the ripple effects of insourcing, about the unintended consequences. Law departments clearly had an opportunity to save money by insourcing, but what were the risks? Well, one of the risks is that it set law departments out as the exception to the rule in the business services space. If you look at that space, what you can see is that outsourcing, not insourcing, has been the dominant trend. And it's not just in IT, where sort of all of our heads immediately go. It's also in HR, in finance, in marketing, in almost every quote-unquote business support function out there. And there's good reasons for this. If you ask Fortune 500 companies why they outsource, of course they will mention cost cutting, right? That is a very important reason, but they also mention a lot of other really important reasons. The first is it enables them to focus on core services, the things their customers actually care about, the thing that drives the business. They say that it solves capacity issues. This is a big deal for law departments. Law departments tend to grow in an upswing and then shrink in a downturn. The layoffs in the middle create a lot of problems for law firms. They also tell us that it enhances service quality. A similar percent tell us it's an important way to access expertise. This all makes sense when we think about how outsourcing works, and it's the reason that we've started to see law departments begin to try out outsourcing. This is, in many respects, what the DXC United Lex deal, which was signed about 18 months ago. It is also, at least to some degree, what the PwC GE deal was, right? These are multi-year outsourcing contracts, which are similar to what we see in other business support areas.
So there is one important caveat to what Nick just talked about, and that is all of the deals we see in the legal industry are much smaller than what we see in IT, HR, finance, and accounting. Why is that? Why is the legal industry different? Why are law departments insourcing while all other business services functions are outsourcing? Well, Nick and I think that the insourcing trend is a short-term solution to a short-term problem. So what is that problem? In short, the law department does not have very many options. If you look at the legal service provider landscape, you see that it's dominated by law firms. There are only really a few ASPs that can offer the law department a true alternative. But we think this is going to change. We think that over the next 10 years, the legal service provider landscape is going to change dramatically, giving the law department new options.
How do we know? How do we know the service provider landscape is going to change? Well, look at the last 12 months. What you're looking at here is the calendar year of 2018. These are the stories that were reported by the American Lawyer and Law.com. This is the mergers, acquisitions, investments, and alliances that happened in the legal market in that year. This, in many ways, I think, is the legal market's evolution in a snapshot. We have law firms merging with each other to create national and international providers. We see legal tech sucking in investment to expand into new areas, to build scale, to modify their services. We see ASPs merging with each other, getting investment, acquiring others to build scale, to solve that problem that Aaron discussed. And last, of course, we see the big four expanding into the legal market in a few different areas, using a few different strategies. And this is just a snapshot of 2018. There were many more deals signed last year. And this is just a single year. What does 5 years of this do to the legal market? What does 10 years of this do to the legal market? That, in my mind, is the $100 billion question looming over the legal market right now. How does all of this evolve the service provider landscape? We spend a lot of time talking to law firms, to law departments about this question. We also reach out to academia, and it's because they provide a slightly different viewpoint on this. And we reached out to Heidi Gardner. Heidi Gardner is a distinguished fellow at the Harvard Center on the Legal Profession. She spends a lot of time talking to law departments and law firms about the future of the legal market. Have a listen to hear what she said on how she thinks the industry is going to evolve.
I've been predicting for a while a sort of hourglass effect in the legal arena, where you have some firms that will be moving, continuously upward in terms of profitability and essentially, an elite status. And I think they will do that through a combination of moves. It may not be in the same shape that they are in right now. They will find ways to continue focusing more and more on the high-end, true brain surgery type of work, if you want to use that old analogy. I think that they're going to be finding new models to be able to keep that focus and shed some of the less profitable work, some of the more routine work in lots of different ways, whether that's captive parts of their own firm or whether that's through JVs and alliances. I'm not sure, but I do think we're going to continue to see some firms rise up through the profitability ranks. I also think that we're going to see quite a solid group of legal providers, whether that's traditional firms or not, who are going to be harnessing technology and data to do what they do far more efficiently than what we see right now.
I like Heidi's idea. I think it echoes much of what we're seeing in the legal market right now and what Aaron and I see in the data. At its core, basically, the theory argues the legal market is going to split into two distinct market segments. A bet the company group focused on the highest value services and a run the company group focused on the day-to-day needs of large corporate clients. Now, a lot of us have heard these terms. What's important to note here is this is not how the legal industry is currently organized. There are a ton of vendors who currently operate in both spaces. There are even more vendors who aspire to operate in both spaces. Aaron and I don't believe that's tenable. Ultimately, we think these are going to be two very different business models going forward. And as that happens, we think sunlight is going to ultimately spread the service providers in these markets. Now, the first question that comes up when you think about the legal market this way is how big are each of these segments, right? What's the market opportunity? Well, it's difficult to say, but we can look at a few different data points. 38% of the market, we would argue, is in that high-end services range, that bet the company space. These are services where the hourly rates are at least 2 times above what an in-house resource costs. What the market is telling us with those hourly rates are these are complex, high-value services. 40% of work right now, when we look at it, is at risk of insourcing. These are services that are basically the same cost of hiring an in-house resource or a law firm or a lawyer. And then there's 20% of services sort of somewhere in between. It's hard to tell exactly where this ends up, But I think with a little bit of process improvement and with a little bit of technology, we'll probably ultimately see a good portion of that work moving down into that run the company segment.
So what are the trends that we see in each of these two segments? Well, if we look at the bet the company segment, a clear trend that we see is that equity partner compensation has increased dramatically over the last 2 decades, far outpacing the rest of the market. This really speaks to the core competencies that these firms will have to develop and maintain. Compensation and more broadly talent management are key to these firms. These firms rely on providing the best advice, and to do that, you need very talented people, and you need to retain those people. So while compensation is a huge part of this, there are a whole bunch of other things to consider, such as diversity, work from home policies, and paid family leave. There are also some risks that this group of firms face. One in particular is consolidation. Right now, there are about 25 to 50 bet the company firms, depending on how you define it. Quite simply, Nick and I do not believe that there will be 50 bet the company firms in 10 years. Now, will there be 10, 15, 20? We don't know. But what we do know is there will be some losses along the way. So what's going to separate those survivors from the casualties? We think that there are 2 main things. The first we just touched on, which is talent management. The second is the ability to remain focused on high-value work. This is actually more difficult than it sounds. It requires the strategic discipline to shed work as it migrates from high value to mid-value. It also requires the ability to really see and spot where the market is headed.
So what are the trends on the run the company side? Well, one of the most visible trends is scale building. What we can see in the law firm market is that the biggest law firms in the world have gone from 1,800 lawyers all the way up to 9,000 lawyers today, or almost 9,000. And the trajectory here is pretty clear. We all see this almost every day in the market, where we see mergers and acquisitions and law firms getting bigger and bigger. The next most visible trend is globalization. Law firms have added new locations in the United States and abroad at a breakneck pace over the last decade or so. The biggest law firm in the world is in 170 locations in 73 countries. These 2 trends are obviously linked. Law firms, as they've grown abroad, have gotten bigger and bigger. Part of the reason for that is they have grown through mergers. So scale has obviously been impacted by this. The ultimate goal of both of these things is to provide a one-stop shop for big corporate clients' day-to-day needs. They'll be global enough to service them in any location. They'll be big enough in terms of headcount and services to offer them almost any service. The next big trend that is extremely visible, particularly to the people in this room, is a whole raft of new service providers, many of which are here at Legalweek, many of which, frankly, are sitting in this room. We see the first group to mention here is the ASPs. This includes Elevate, UnitedLex, Axiom, and a whole range of other service providers. What's important to note about these guys is they are starting to be big enough to truly offer an alternative to law firms. Axiom right now is somewhere around $400 million big. This is big enough, I can tell you in my conversations with law firms, that they are starting to take notice. They are starting to be worried. They see work literally migrating from their balance sheet over to the ASP's balance sheet. The next group to mention is the Big Four. For those of you who have not been paying attention to the Big Four's expansion in the legal industry, you should begin doing so. The Big Four have been expanding into the legal industry slowly, but in the past 12 months, it has definitely sped up. We've seen this in the stories almost on a weekly basis in the American Lawyer and in Law.com, stories about the Big Four opening new offices in Hong Kong, in London, in Washington, D.C., acquiring ASPs, and also expanding into a whole raft of technology solutions. The last group to mention here is the technology providers, who are trying to span the gap between technology solutions on the one hand and services on the other hand. All of these new competitors in this market are putting immense pressure on law firms and the old law firm business model. We see this in the law firm data that comes out. We see their revenue per lawyer flatlining. We see demand flatlining. We see it in almost every data point we look at. Aaron and I believe that pressure is going to intensify, and as it intensifies, the run the company segment will ultimately be completely transformed. There will be a lot of consolidation, we believe. What will separate the survivors and the casualties in this space? We think scale is going to be important, but it's not just about headcount, it's not just about offices, it's more than that. It's the ability to use scale as a competitive weapon. It's the ability to collect data, analyze that data, and use it to improve services and reduce cost. This is candidly not something that law firms have been very good at. It is something alternative service providers and legal tech has been very good at. The second reason scale is going to be important is because providers are going to have to consistently invest in process management, improvements, and new technologies. This is an area where, at least theoretically, law firms could have an advantage. The biggest law firms in the world are significantly bigger than any of the ASPs or even many of the technology providers. And they should have an advantage, but they haven't been spending those dollars in these areas. That could change, and we see signs of it changing. The last core competency that's worth mentioning is a client-centric model. Now, every service provider thinks they have a client-centric model. I will tell you, I talk to law departments all the time, and they do not report that, particularly as it relates to law firms. What does a client-centric model mean in the run the company space? It means the ability to productize services, to put things on a shelf that clients can take off and plug and play right away. It means the ability to partner with your clients in much the same way that consulting companies have been doing for decades. This is not something that is in the legal market's DNA. It is something ASPs are somewhat good at. It is something law firms are not so good at. This has to change because this, in my opinion, is going to define the most successful firms from the less successful firms.
There is one more trend that we would like everyone to keep in mind this week, and that is a benefit of market segmentation is that it creates the opportunity for collaboration across these segments. This is something that we think is going to be a big trend going forward, and we already see this happening. We see the Big Four and law firms collaborating, and ASPs and law firms. And we think in the coming years, we're going to see a lot more of this.
We would argue that this is where you should put your energy here at Legalweek. The beauty of Legalweek, to some degree, is that everyone is here. The ASPs are here, the legal tech providers are here, the law departments, the law firms, everyone is here. As you traverse your way through the week, by all means, check out your competitors' new services, see where they're evolving, go attend the sessions, understand what the experts are saying about your particular area of the market and how it's evolving. But above all, I would argue that you should reach out to people you don't normally bump into on a day-to-day basis in the legal market. Those could be competitors, they could be other service providers who live in other parts of the legal market ecosystem. I believe that is where the opportunity for collaboration is. And I personally think there's an opportunity here for almost everyone here at Legalweek. If you see Aaron or myself, please say hi. We will be in the Mercury Rotunda on the 3rd floor, which is right down the hall all week. We will be geeking out on data. We will be talking about legal industry trends. We would love to hear what you guys have to say about your particular neck of the woods. So stop by, say hi. And above all, I'd just say have a great week. Enjoy yourselves. Enjoy each other. Thank you all for joining us.